PhD student here at Macquarie, a biologist studying manta rays, and I do a lot of behavioural study. To do that, I've done a lot of diving in a place called Raja Ampat. My interest in animals started from a really young age. I remember my grandma taking me to the zoo, and my parents always took us on interesting trips and holidays, and we'd always be looking for wildlife. So we went, for example, to Canada to look for wolves and bears. In the trips to the zoo, I remember really vividly, like with my grandma, being really interested in all the behaviors of all the different animals and really watching them for a long time. And as I went to school, I got interested in science and really learning about how to study animals. And I knew I wanted to do biology. I did biology as my undergrad at university, but I knew I wanted to study zoology. At the same time, there's really a lot of threats to marine animals, particularly from fishing. Overfishing is a really big problem, and that's a big problem for manta rays. But also ocean pollution, climate change is really affecting the oceans as well. We're kind of in danger of losing a lot of these really interesting, cool species before we've really got to know them. So I think it's really important to learn about these animals that live there and try and inspire the public to care about them before we lose them, really. I conduct research with an NGO called Marine Megafauna Foundation, and they study manta rays, but also study other large marine organisms like whale sharks and other sharks and big fish like marlin, whales as well. We're really trying to push for protection of those species and to get the public, but also governments and decision makers involved in building enthusiasm for the protection of those species and putting proper protections in place for those large marine organisms. So a lot of my work is done in collaboration with Marine Megafauna Foundation. That's how I started my field work. That's what I've been doing for the last few years in Indonesia, working with that group. And I have as one of my supervisors the head of Marine Megafauna Foundation, who's called Andrea Marshall. My PhD project is trying to understand social structure in manta rays. So basically trying to work out if they have friends and if they travel with those individuals, if they stay together. And I think that's quite important. The social structure is quite important to understanding how they behave and how they relate to their environment. And those are things that we really need to know in order to protect them. There's a lot more people using the ocean to catch fish or to hunt manta rays, which happens, unfortunately. There are significant threats to populations of manta rays. Some of them are a lot more threatened than others. There are several populations within Indonesia that are really highly threatened by humans who are going to catch a lot of the manta rays, and they're hunted particularly for this one part of their gills, which is not ideal because a lot of people are killing the manta rays just for that small part, which is worth a lot of money. There's that problem. Luckily, in the place I study manta rays, which is called Raja Ampat in the east of Indonesia, there are a lot of tourists going to that area to dive with the manta rays especially. And those tourists, usually they're very well behaved, dive properly and don't really affect the manta rays too much. But on some occasions, we've seen really bad behavior by divers. If there are too many divers going to the places that you see the manta rays, it can be a big problem in the end. It started when I went to do my dive master course in Mozambique. I was doing this long swim, I think it's like one kilometer behind, and you swim behind a boat. I was in the middle of doing this swim, and I just saw underneath me this dark shape approaching me, and I wasn't really sure what it was. But it turned out to be a manta ray. So, and the manta just came under me and swam right along with me and underneath me. And it wasn't the first time I'd seen mantas, but it was the first time that an animal like that had really interacted with me and chosen to share that space in the water with me. And I remember it swam underneath me for a while, and then it turned completely on its back to show me its belly and swam upside down underneath me for maybe 30 seconds. And that was like really amazing for me at the time. I hadn't experienced anything like that before. And it really made me kind of fall in love with those animals. And through my research, I'm hoping to inspire people to really care about the animals, and part of studying their social behavior, trying to inspire the public to care about manta rays. And then also, especially through collaboration with Marine Megafauna Foundation, we really try to put pressure on governments and to influence governments. And there's been quite a lot of success in those areas. For example, the 1986 moratorium on whaling was really instrumental in a lot of those species being saved from extinction, particularly like the animals we have here in Australia, the humpback whales. They've really been a success story from the whaling moratorium. And I'm hoping we can do something similar with sharks and manta rays, which are kind of similarly threatened at the moment.
So my name's Taylor J. McAllister. I am a psychology student. I am an Aboriginal woman, and I am working in mental health and counselling and want to be a psychologist. The community that I grew up in was a rural town, and in rural towns you have a lot of mental health issues because the stigma is a lot more in rural towns. But then moving to the city, I saw a lot of issues associated with being so isolated and separated and independent. But the different communities I'm involved in apart from that is I have quite a big involvement with the deaf community, with the grief community, and with the suicide bereavement community. So for the deaf community, I learned sign language when I was 18. Don't know why, I just took the course. Made a lot of deaf friends, and then from there kind of went on to work in the area, and still involved in it now. But I think that's the common theme in psychology and mental health, is that you're someone who wants to give to other people, and so the common thing that happens is it's hard to take from other people, and you burn out. So I did my honours thesis last year, and I did it on light-skinned Aboriginal identity. It was a very controversial topic, but I found it really interesting because what I was finding is that with a lot of historical government policies which aimed to make people lighter skinned, those people who were the products of those policies were now being shunned from their societies because they don't look like the rest of their community. So that really interested me. So I completed my thesis in that, and I remember it was probably about a year ago, there was this one boy he was 11 years old, and he was talking about his father who suicided, and that he was coping with that. He'd been to camp a few times, but he was very outspoken, but he didn't really talk that much about his father's death. And so anyway, we were having a conversation, and there was a little boy there who said, well, my mum says that I have to be a man and men don't cry. And this little boy whose father had died, he said, you know what, my dad used to say that, and my dad suicided, and I think if we thought that we can't cry, then I think more men are going to suicide. And we started to have a conversation, this little 10-year-old boy leading this conversation about why men should be able to cry and why there's nothing wrong with it. I was so impressed with just how mature that kid was. I think that's a whole part of the industry, is that you're working to help other people, and it's going to become really overwhelming, and a lot of people who are in psychology are empathic, so we feel other people's emotions, and that's what's so, makes it so easy to do the job. But it definitely can get really overwhelming and stressful, especially when they're people that you are close to or know. So for me, it took me a long time, probably about 3 or 4 years, just to put boundaries up, not to read my emails when I was at home. I also think when you are a counsellor, a lot of your friends want to get counselling for free. So learning to put those boundaries up of, I'm a counsellor and that's my job. I don't want to come home and do that. And also just having a good support system. I think it's a really hard lesson that I learned, but you have to practice what you preach. And I would be a hypocrite if I was counselling people and then I wasn't doing the same things for myself. So I think it's just taking my own advice a lot of the time. In general, what I would say is the best thing you can do for yourself is be self-aware. So being transparent is a big part of that. So being honest to yourself and to other people about how you're feeling and what that means and what you need. A lot of people are stressed or overwhelmed because they don't know what they need or they can't communicate that to someone. Knowing yourself and knowing what you need is really important. I think for anyone as well, having a really, really, really strong support network, whether that's family or friends or colleagues, it's really, really important to be able to talk about what you're going through, because if you don't talk about it, how can you process it? Now that I recall, so I started learning sign language for exactly this reason. So I worked at a homeless shelter when I was 18 for about a year, and I used to go there maybe 3 or 4 times a week at nights, and we would just go and feed them, and I would kind of just, casually counsel them. I guess that was the start of my counselling career. And I found this one man, and I was trying to talk to him, and I realised that he was deaf and he couldn't communicate with me. And so I was writing things down, but he wasn't able to read what I was writing. And so I was like, okay, how can I communicate with this guy? He shows up every single day. I see him at least 4 times a week. I should make a little bit of an effort. And so I enrolled into a sign language class, and I just learned how to spell. So you spell with your fingers. And I went back to this man and I said hi, and I said, how are you? I'm learning sign language. And he said to me, I haven't spoken with anyone for 6 months. Just have not communicated with anyone, because he was homeless, he couldn't communicate. And for me, that's a pretty good example of how isolated these people can be.